Learning how to learn is one of the best things you can do for yourself. This is the ultimate advantage for learning guitar or any skill so much faster. That's why I recently read the book Ultra Learning by Scott Young. He explains 9 principles that the best learners in the world use to learn incredibly fast. And the cool thing is that these principles work for all people. Very cool. So in this video, I will share these 9 principles with you and how you can use them to learn guitar faster. My name is Simen and I'm a guitarist, music producer and graphic designer from Norway. I'm here to share everything I learned so far in my journey and document what I learned in real time. Before we start, you should also get something good to drink. I'm drinking sparkling water with taste. Very good. The first principle is what you do before you actually start learning. And that is to first draw a map. In order to learn something, you need to actually figure out what to learn. And since you are my friend, I've done all the work for you. So here's a complete overview of everything I recommend learning on guitar in order. I'll get straight to the point. If I were to teach you how to become a great guitarist as fast as possible, these are the exact things I would teach you. This video is for you if you are a beginner, more advanced guitarist, or somewhere in between. 2 quick notes before we start. First, learning guitar is not a linear process. For example, I learned 7 chords a long time ago when I was young, but that doesn't mean I stopped practicing 7 chords. And secondly, here's why this video is so important. If you miss one step on your guitar journey, it's going to be really hard to get to the next step. But once you understand that step, it becomes much easier. So these steps is what I will give you in this video. I have divided the guitar journey into 8 different levels. Levels 1 to 3 are beginner, 4 to 6 intermediate, and 7 to 8 are advanced. Let's start with level number 1, which is complete beginner, brand new to the guitar. Start with the basics of guitar, string names, how to tune, placing in notes, how to hold the guitar, how to read tabs and chord diagrams, how to hold your pick, basic minor and major open chords, basic strumming, and simple one-note riffs you like. Next, level 2. The beginner phase is a lot about just getting in the reps, so you want to keep it really stupid simple and just get used to the guitar. So here's what to learn in level 2. First position of the pentatonic scale. 12-bar blues. We're talking rhythm playing and simple improvisation. More colorful open chords like sus2 and sus4. More strumming patterns. Play songs that matches your skill level. Again, in the beginning it's a lot about volume and getting in the reps. Then we have level 3 of the beginner phase. Here we have all 5 positions of the pentatonic scale. Visualize the fretboard. Introduction to bar chords. Play songs that matches your skill level once again, because we want to get in the reps and get used to playing guitar. Next up is level 4 and the intermediate phase. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. And this is why many players experience the intermediate plateau. Don't know how you pronounce that, plateau. Yeah, so we are going to spend more time in level 4 because this is such an important foundation. Okay, so we have the pentatonic scale in all keys. Understand and play the shapes of the major scale. The understanding part is really important. Understand the theory behind chords. Minor and major bar chords. 7th chords. I'm actually creating detailed courses on each topic on playwithaplan.com. I have courses for everything I mentioned so far in level 4, and I'm gradually going to increase the whole success path for what to learn on guitar in order, which I'm really excited about, so I need to take a little sip for that. So if you want to be on that journey, you can check that out on playwithaplan.com. I'll leave the link in the description. Okay, let's continue level 4. We have technique fundamentals. Then I'm talking about right hand, left hand, alternate picking, and legato. Finger picking and rhythm playing. Improvisation and soloing fundamentals. Okay, let's go to level 5. Here we have minor and major bar chords across the neck, the 7 modes of the major scale, economy picking, legato, 7th arpeggios across the whole neck. When you feel confident with everything so far, you have an incredible foundation to become a great guitar player. Okay, so let's go to level 6. 7th chords across the whole neck. Extended chords like 6, 9, add 9. the altered scale, 2-note per string arpeggios, creative use of slides and bends. And finally, we have the advanced phase. And if you want to, you can learn some of these advanced skills earlier in your guitar journey, but this is the time to really go deep. So, here's level 7. More fancy chords. Here I'm talking beautiful voicings that are useful to know. The theory behind beautiful chord progressions with non-diatonic harmony. Extended arpeggios with nines and so on. More advanced applications of the pentatonic scale. Double stops. Then soloing and improvisation over chords. And after 7 comes 8. So let's go to the last one. Level 8. Fourth chords. Drop 2 voicings. Extended chords, like 11 and 13 chords. More advanced use of arpeggios. The melodic minor scale and other fancy scales. Hybrid picking. And from here you can really add loads more if you want to go deeper into specific topics. So now we have a map of what to practice on guitar. But keep in mind that learning guitar is not always a linear process. Okay, let's move on to principle number 2, which is focus. Bad focus and procrastination are massive progress killers for your guitar playing. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you some very specific tips on how to improve your focus and also how to beat procrastination as a guitar player. Imagine that you're trying to cut something with a really dull knife. That's going to take some time because the knife is really dull. But with a sharp knife, the same task will go so much faster. So we want our focus to be like a razor-sharp knife. To achieve this, we will look at 2 stages of focus. The first one is starting. This is the first problem many people have when playing guitar. Procrastination. But why do you actually procrastinate? This is usually because you either want to do something else, or you think that playing guitar will be uncomfortable, or both. So the first step to get started more quickly is to simply recognize when you are procrastinating. Is this because you want to scroll on your phone instead? Then maybe you should spend less time on your phone. Or is it because you don't want to practice for some reason? Maybe you just want to drink sparkling water all day. That's totally fine too. It's completely normal to have this craving for sparkling water or something else. But the first step is to just make a mental note of when it happens, because when you actually get started playing guitar, it's usually quite enjoyable. So when you have learned to recognize procrastination, then we can go to step 2 of starting. This is to start by practicing for just 5 minutes. This is such a small task, so it should be quite easy to get started. And that is the goal here, to simply get started. And once you get started, you usually play for more than 5 minutes anyway. So, a little sip for that. When you get good at starting, you can try step 3, which is the Pomodoro technique. Set the timer at, for example, 25 minutes, and when those minutes are over, take a 5-minute break. Then repeat for as long as you like. Focus is a skill, so as you can see with these steps, we start super small, we just start with something, and over time you can eventually do it for longer. There's a bird outside of my window. Alright, so let's go to the next phase of focus, which is sustaining the focus. This can be surprisingly hard, but also extremely powerful. So I will give you 1, 2, 3 tips on how you can make it easier to sustain good focus when practicing. The first one is your environment. You want to make it easy to focus. Remove distractions, put your phone in another room, try to be in a room where you don't get disturbed. You also want to avoid multitasking. Even though that you feel like you can multitask, you probably can't. Sorry. What's really happening is task switching, and that's really not very efficient. That being said, different people like different environments, so try different things and see what works for you. The second one is about your practice session itself. There are many things you probably should practice, but it's incredibly powerful to do more of what you actually want to practice. Let's say you have a few weeks where you are really excited and into beautiful chords. Then I encourage you to spend some more time on beautiful chords. It's going to be much easier to focus on beautiful chords because you are really excited. The next one has nothing to do with guitar, but it's still really important, and that is your mind. If you have a lot of stress and anxiety in your life, that will most likely impact your ability to focus. This is easier said than done, but try your best to remove negative emotions and frustrations in your life. A calm and happy mind is good for sustaining focus. Other than that, pay attention to when your focus is bad and when your focus is good. Personally, I have really good focus in the morning. So I always practice guitar in the mornings because that's when my focus is good. So try different things and see what works for you. So that is principle 2, focus. If you still don't have something nice to drink, now is the time to make yourself comfortable, find something good to drink and enjoy. Let's move on to principle number 3, which is called directness. Imagine that you're sitting in your comfortable chair and watching a few YouTube videos about playing guitar. This is really fun, I do it all the time myself, but it's also a big waste of time if you don't use the principle called directness. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share what the principle of directness is and how you can use it to improve your guitar skills. I'm going to share 4 different ways you can use directness to learn guitar faster. But first, let's talk about what directness really is. Directness is the idea of learning being tied closely to the situation or context you want to use it in. Let's say you want to be really good at playing with other musicians. Then directness would be to actually play with other musicians. The opposite of directness here would be to instead read a book about how to play with others instead of actually playing with others. Another example is if you want to learn Spanish because you want to have conversations in Spanish. Then you want to practice by actually having conversations in Spanish. Schools often fail to do this. Personally, I had Spanish for 3 years at school, but I can't really speak one full sentence of Spanish anymore. In order to make directness work, you need to be really clear about your goals and what you actually want to achieve. Then do that thing as much as possible. Then do that thing. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. Then do that thing. So now we know what directness is. Let's look at 4 different strategies you can use. The first one is project-based learning. This involves organizing your learning around producing something. An example could be if you want to be great at making music, then you can simply create songs. And by making songs, you will also get better in the process. Very clever. The second strategy is immersive learning. This involves immersing yourself in an environment where the skill is practiced. Let's go back to our example where we want to become good at playing with real musicians and just jam. Then a good approach is to actually play a lot with other musicians and jam. Sometimes though, it can be hard to practice a skill with 100% direct practice. Then you can use the flight simulator method. This is when you create an environment where the experience can be simulated. When learning to fly a plane, you probably want to learn it before you actually do it, which makes a flight simulator a good approach. Another example, if you want to get good at improvising on guitar with other musicians, you can simulate the experience by improvising over backing tracks. All right, the 4th strategy for directness is the challenge approach. This is when you give yourself some kind of challenge in order to really push yourself. Let's say you want to dramatically improve your guitar skills. Then you could give yourself, for example, 60 days, and in the end of those 60 days, you need to give a live performance to show what you have learned. So that is the principle of directness and 4 different ways you can use it. As a conclusion, be very clear on what you actually want to be good at, then practice that as directly as possible. So that is principle 3, directness. Next, we're going to look at principle 4, drills. When learning guitar, you have to think about different skills like chords, technique, scales, arpeggios, learning songs, and improvisation, oral skills, and musicality. Then all of these main skills have many different sub-skills. But improving all these skills at once is really hard. That's why we want to focus on different sub-skills in isolation. And we do that by using drills. So we break apart guitar playing and only practice one small thing at a time. Then eventually we put everything together. Because the end goal is not to master all the skills in isolation, the end goal is to become a great guitar player. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to take a few sips here and there. And also, I'm going to show you 4 different types of drills you can use to become a great guitar player. The first drill you can use is called time slicing. This is when you isolate a slice in time. Let's say you're trying to learn a guitar solo. And a guitar solo has a few very challenging parts, so you can take only those challenging parts and practice those in isolation. And when you feel comfortable with those parts, you put everything together and play the whole solo. So you're breaking down the solo and then putting it back together. You can also learn the solo section by section, and in the end, you put all the sections together. So that's time slicing. Sounds very cool. So next time you're trying to learn a song or solo, you can slice time. Next, we have doing exercises. This is the most common one for guitar players. This means doing exercises to improve a specific skill. Let's say you want to improve your legato technique, then you want to do legato exercises. If you want to improve your alternate picking, do some alternate picking exercises. And so on. You can make exercises for all guitar skills. Just be clear on what you want to improve. Next, we have the copycat. This is a fun one I don't think enough people are doing. The copycat method is to copy someone. An example is if you have a guitarist you like, then try to listen to that guitarist as closely as possible and then replicate their playing as closely as possible. If you really like a guitarist, this is the best way to get closer to their playing style and sound. It really forces you to pay attention to details. So the copycat, very fun and incredibly effective. I find the three I have covered so far the most useful. However, I want to mention one last one, which is called prerequisite chaining. It sounds very fancy, which is nice, but the concept is simple. It means that you are trying to do something before you have all the skills you need. For example, let's say you want to get better at improvising over chord changes, which is a challenging skill. Then you can try to improvise over some chords, but you might not know all the best scales to use yet, or the right scales to use. So when you hit a chord you struggle to improvise over, then you pause and try to actually figure out what scales to use. So you figure it out as you go. To conclude the different types of drills, we have time slicing, doing exercises, copycat, and prerequisite chaining. So that was principle 4, drills. And surprise, after 4 comes 5. And principle 5 is challenge yourself. If practicing guitar feels easy and smooth, we are more likely to feel that we are learning. If practicing guitar is hard, we feel that we are not learning. But it's actually the opposite. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share 3 different ways you can challenge yourself and learn guitar faster. The first way you can challenge yourself is active recall. This means that instead of reviewing information again, you try to remember it from memory. This is hard and mentally draining, but it's also incredibly effective. Let's say you want to learn the 5 shapes of the major scale. Instead of always looking at the shapes, try to play them from memory. If you're trying to learn a song, don't look at the tabs, but first play what you remember. As mentioned, active recall is very hard and feels very challenging, but it's also one of the best ways to actually learn fast, according to science. Method number 2 is self-generated challenges. When you want to learn something, create your own challenges. Let's say you want to learn how to play all chords in all keys. You can start by playing all the chords in C major. And then the challenge could be to figure out all the chords in different keys as well. So you don't look up the answers, you try to figure it out by yourself. I actually have challenges like this on my website playwithaplan.com, so check that out if you want to improve your guitar playing. The link will be in the description. Method number 3 to challenge yourself is flashcards. This isn't super common for guitar players, but it can be a great tool for when you need to remember scales and shapes. And it can also be really fun. I used this earlier to practice the 7 modes of the major scale. So me and my flatmate at the time, Magnus, we made 2 different bowls with paper flashcards. The first bowl had all the 12 different keys, and the second bowl had the 7 different modes. So we took 1 key and 1 mode, so we could get, for example, D and Dorian, D Dorian, or like F and Lydian, F Lydian. Then we have to play these modes. And to make it more challenging, you can make up rules and kind of treat it like a game. To conclude, we have looked at 3 different ways you can challenge yourself when learning guitar. First one is active recall. Then we have self-generated challenges. And lastly, flashcards. So that was Principle 5, challenge yourself. Next, it's time to look at Principle 6, which is feedback. Let's say that right now, your guitar playing is at point A, but you want to practice and get your playing to point B. To achieve that, you can use the principle of feedback. And I'm not going to talk about stuff like record yourself or play in front of people, which are also useful. Instead, I would talk about the 3 different types of feedback, how you can give feedback to yourself, and how to use it to become a better guitar player. Let's first put down this sparkling water with taste and define what great feedback really is. Great feedback shows you the difference between what you are doing now and what you want to achieve. It also helps you know what to do next to get better. Next, let's look at the 3 different types of feedback. The first one is called outcome feedback. Imagine that you're learning to improvise. And when you improvise over a backing track, it sounds really bad. And you don't know why, you just know that it doesn't work. This is outcome feedback. You know it's wrong, but you don't know why. The next type of feedback is informational feedback. Let's use the same example where we try to improvise over a backing track. This is a very common type of feedback for players with some more experience, because when you improvise and it sounds really bad, you might know that you're using the wrong scale, but you don't necessarily know what scale to use instead. So informational feedback is that you know what you're doing wrong, but you don't always know how to fix it. Luckily, we have this wonderful thing called the internet, where you can look for solutions. So a sip for that. When you get even more experience, feedback starts to get really interesting. Now we can use the 3rd type of feedback, which is corrective feedback. Again, if you're improvising over a backing track and it sounds bad, you might know why. You are, for example, using the wrong scale. Then you might figure out a better scale to use, and now it sounds good. So you have corrected yourself. This is corrective feedback, which is the most valuable type of feedback. You know what you're doing wrong, and you also know how to fix it. And as mentioned, we have this wonderful thing called the internet, so it's easier than ever to give corrective feedback to yourself. Figure out the problem, and then how to fix it. To conclude, we have talked about outcome feedback, informational feedback, and corrective feedback. And you might see a pattern here. The more experience you get, the easier it is to give good feedback to yourself. But the challenge is that you don't know what you don't know, especially if you are a beginner or have less experience. So if you don't know how to fix the problem, well, you need to get that information somewhere, because the problem isn't going to fix itself. That's where it's useful to get a guitar teacher or someone to guide you, because they can give you very fast corrective feedback, which is the best kind of feedback that will make you a better player faster. So that was Principle 6, feedback. And we're covering quite a lot in this video, so no need to use everything I'm talking about, at least not at once. Start with a few things you can apply to your guitar learning journey, and then take it from there. All the principles can also be used for any other skills, not just guitar. Alright, let's move on to Principle 7. Remember what you learn. Hello! Did you know that when learning something new on guitar, you actually forget it very quickly? This is because of something called the forgetting curve. And the biggest loss of information is straight after you have learned something. Over the next few minutes, I will share 3 hacks you can use to easily remember what you learn. The first way to remember more is spaced repetition. This works especially well for remembering scales, shapes, and songs. Let's say you're trying to learn the shapes of the major scale. Then you will learn faster if you space out your practice sessions instead of doing everything at once. So it's better to do 10 minutes of the major scale every day instead of doing 1 hour weekly. It also works surprisingly well to practice a few minutes here and there throughout your day. Just like a few minutes, but multiple times. That's the thing here. spaced repetition. Number 2 is about muscle memory. When you learn to ride a bike, it takes a lot to forget it. This is because it has become muscle memory. We can apply this to guitar playing as well, and since guitar playing is such a physical skill, then muscle memory is our best friend. It's very straightforward. If you do something for a very long time, the movement eventually becomes automatic. That's why technique exercises and doing technique exercises quite often is so good for technique, because technique relies so heavily on muscle memory. Number 3 is called similarity. This is when you learn new information and you try to link it to something similar that you already know. Again, let's say you're trying to learn the shapes of the major scale. And a major scale is almost the exact same as the pentatonic scale. The only difference is that the major scale has 2 more notes. So by using the pentatonic scale as your foundation, you can learn a major scale faster and also remember it for longer. To conclude, we have talked about 3 ways to remember more of what you learn. First one, spaced repetition. Number 2, muscle memory. Number 3, similarity. That was Principle 7, remember what you learn. Next, let's talk about Principle 8, intuition. The best guitar players can play amazing things with very little effort. They don't really have to think, they just play and it works. It looks really impressive and you might feel that this kind of level is out of reach, but this is not true. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the principle of intuition and how you can develop a great intuition as well. So, a great intuition is when you don't have to think too much about something, but instead you kind of feel something. A good example is when learning songs by ear. With some practice, you can quickly learn all the chords of a song without needing to look them up. Here are 3 rules to follow to develop a better intuition. Rule number 1 is to don't give up on hard problems easily. The more you push through hard problems, the more you build your intuition, because this is how you understand something at a deeper level. So, if it feels hard, that's actually a good sign. Let's use again the example by learning songs by ear. Even though it will feel hard in the beginning, try to not look up the chords too quickly. Instead, you want to try for a while, even though it's hard, because hard is good. Rule number 2 is to prove things to understand them. Again, we want to really understand guitar on a deeper level. Let's say you want to play some really tasty chord progressions. Instead of just playing chord progressions, try to really pay attention to what works and what doesn't. You can even try to create your own chord progressions. In this way, you're not just playing guitar, but you're also building a deeper understanding and intuition of the guitar. Rule number 3 is to don't fool yourself. Here's an interesting fact. The less you know about guitar, the less questions you have. And the more you know about guitar, the more questions you have. Because when you are a beginner, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know all the things you can practice, for example. But when you get more experience, you start to see all the different things you can practice and all the different elements of guitar. So what you want to do is to always question your understanding and be very honest with yourself. Do you truly understand that scale? Do you really understand why this guitar solo works so well? Be curious and don't be afraid to ask questions that you might feel are stupid. And also take a little sip here and there. That was Principle 8, intuition. And Principle 9 is one I think is very overlooked. And that is the principle of experimentation. When you have played guitar for a while, it's very common to kind of feel stuck and that you're not really getting any better. One thing you can do to overcome this is to use the principle of experimentation. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what it is and how you can use it to become a better guitar player. Experimentation is key to mastery. Think about it. All the great players have developed their own unique style at some point. And that is because they don't only rely on learning from others, but they also spend a lot of time just experimenting and exploring the guitar. But just exploring and experimenting with guitar sounds very vague. So let's look at 3 specific ways you can actually do it. The first way is to compare methods side by side. Try different methods to see which work best. One thing guitar players do a lot is to visualize scales. And let's say you're going to play a solo with a minor pentatonic scale. One way to use the scale, which is the most common one, is to simply use the 5 pentatonic shapes. But there are many other ways to play the scale too. Let's say you try to think the scale in arpeggios. Or just try different kind of shapes outside of the normal shapes. Maybe something like 3 notes on one string, then 1 note. So when you're going to play a solo, simply try different approaches and see what works and what doesn't. I actually did this. So when I improvise with a pentatonic scale now, I actually think in arpeggios most of the time instead of scale shapes. I teach this arpeggio approach in my 25-day guitar transformation. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to check that out. The second method is to create limitations. When learning something in the beginning, the challenge is that you don't know what to do. But when you are more experienced, the challenge is that you think you know what to do. But what got you here might not take you to the next level. To overcome this, try to add in limitations. Let's take the example of the minor pentatonic scale again. And let's say that we want to break out of the typical scale boxes. So you can try to give yourself some limitations. And a limitation could be, for example, that you have to play 3 notes on one string before moving on to the next string. This limitation will force you to think differently, because the normal minor pentatonic scale shapes only have 2 notes per string. The third method to experiment is good old noodle time. You are probably doing this already. Noodle time is to just noodle and play around with your guitar. The key to make this approach effective is to be very intentional about your noodle time. Really try to experiment with different chords, shapes, licks, and so on. There's a good chance you are going to play something you haven't actually learned anywhere, but it still sounds great. And noodling intentionally is also a good way to just experiment and explore in general. And it's fun. It's important to have fun. To conclude, I talked about 3 different ways to experiment on guitar. Number 1, compare methods side by side. Number 2, create limitations. And number 3, noodle time. So that was actually the last principle of learning guitar faster, inspired by the super cool book Ultra Learning by Scott Young. We have covered a lot, so feel free to come back to this video from time to time, because it's impossible to do everything at once. I understand that this can be overwhelming, so to tie everything together, I actually have one more section for you. This will make it clear specifically on what your guitar practice can actually look like. After playing guitar for 1 year, just kidding, 15 years, I've tried everything from a very strict practice routine to no practice routine at all. My conclusion is that both can work as long as you include 3 essential steps, which I call the LEC framework. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to share this framework, and you're going to see that if you miss just 1 step, well, that's going to be a problem. Surprise, we'll start with step 1. Think about something on guitar you want to learn or improve. Right now. I'll give you 2 sec. It can be anything, but for this video, I'm going to use the major scale as an example. And imagine that you have never played the major scale before. Then it's going to be really hard to actually play it. You don't just wake up one day and suddenly you know how to play the major scale. Unless you are very special, of course. But for most immortal people, we need to learn it from somewhere. So the first step of the framework is lesson. And a lesson could either be a YouTube video, guitar teacher, blog post, online course, or similar. So if you want to learn the major scale, simply find good lessons that explain the major scale. Simple as that. But be very mindful about your lessons, because this is a very small part of the framework. Imagine that you spend 90% of your practice time watching YouTube videos. Then you're going to be really good at watching YouTube videos. I'm going to put down my water, because this leads nicely into step 2 of the framework. Now you have learned about the major scale, and you have all the information you need. Now it's time to practice what you just learned, because we want to be good at the major scale. So step 2 is exercise. Create or find some good exercises for what you just learned. For the major scale, I could, for example, play the scale in thirds, which means I skip one note at a time. This is a very effective way to learn scale shapes. Learning guitar is a bit like going to the gym. Don't get in good shape by just thinking about the gym, but you have to actually go to the gym and put in some work. Yeah, so that's step 2, exercise. And if you think this framework sounds simple, it is, because it is, but it's also really effective. So far, we learned something through a lesson, then we have practiced that through exercises. But the end goal is not to play exercises. The end goal is to be able to actually use our new skills. That's why we play guitar in the first place. Let's keep using the major scale as an example. We don't just want to play exercises. I guess you don't go to Spotify and listen to scale shapes. In the end, we want to use the major scale to play beautiful music. And we can do that through a challenge. It could, for example, be improvising over a backing track or playing with other musicians. We want to implement what we have just learned and practiced. And it's very intentional. I call this a challenge. The reason is that when something feels challenging, that means you're learning. So it's not necessarily hard, it's just new. Hopefully you start to see how much sense this framework actually makes. When you think about it, just use some common sense. Let's conclude this 3-step framework. First, figure out what you want to learn, then find a good lesson to learn it. Next, create or find exercises to practice what you just learned. Lastly, it's time to bring everything together in a challenge. That is to make sure you truly understand everything, because in the end, we want to be able to actually use our new skills. Implementation is key. So now you might think, okay, I need to find good lessons and good exercises and also some challenges. Well, what's a coincidence? Because I've actually made everything for you on my website, playwithaplan.com. You'll get lessons for exactly what you should learn, then exercises to practice, and challenges to make sure you can use your new skills. So maybe I'll see you on playwithaplan.com or in the next video. Everything is possible.